much, Paul. I have no idea what you just said. Thanks a lot for the invitation to Novosibirsk. I've never been here. I had to look on the map first where Novosibirsk lies. Now I know. Yes, and thank you very much for giving myself the opportunity to talk a little bit about eBay, and also Francois Renaud, who's also working at eBay, to do a little bit of more technical talk. So let me ask you one question first. Who has never used eBay or any of the eBay products? Okay. Well, I just wanted to say there is ebay.ru, so you may want to check it out. Anyway, so today is about unfolding the Swiss Army knife, and you may wonder what does that mean. So the talk basically comes from, I live in Switzerland, and you probably all know Swiss Army knives. They're very handy tools. And there's actually a very nice analogy between test engineering and how test engineering has transformed in the last few years at eBay and the Swiss Army knife. So that's the analogy that I want to use. Let's talk about eBay real quick. Just have to move out of the way here. So eBay is a fairly young company, but in the internet space, it's actually quite old. Right? It was founded in 1995, so it's kind of, well, the fact that we're still around shows that we maybe did something right. We're headquartered in San Jose in California, right in the Silicon Valley, and we have roughly 30,000 employees. Not just eBay, but also companies like PayPal that belong to eBay, so that all makes sense. We have more than 100 million active users on the site, so really, depending on the country, there's some room for improvement here in Russia, but in other countries, they are very saturated sometimes, and other countries are just on the start to use eBay. Oops. This is an interesting number, $68 billion US transaction volume. And what that means, it's the value of the goods that gets transacted on the eBay site. Yeah, so it's the value of goods that people buy and sell. It's not the money that eBay makes, unfortunately. it's what gets transacted over the site. That's a big number. If you actually break that down into per day and per second, it translates into $2,000 US every second that is transacted over the eBay site. Now, I work in testing, and then you know that if you test the software, or if you're responsible for a part of the software of those $2,000, then that just puts a little bit more pressure on you. But I can still sleep quite well at night, no worries. I have a great team that does all of the work. Good. Mobile. I see a lot of people, smartphones, iPads, and all that. Same thing. Mobile for us is a huge market. So we just had more than 100 million downloads of the eBay app. I think last November it was one of the most downloaded apps worldwide, I believe. At the time when I did this slide, we didn't have the 2012 numbers yet, so we estimated that the mobile transaction volume will actually double in 2012 to $10 billion US. It actually went to $13 billion US. So 30% more than what we actually estimated. A little bit of tech data, so we have about 10 petabytes of data in our clusters. How much is a petabyte? 1,000 terabytes? Yeah, exactly. I had to look that up too when I saw that number first. 2 billion page views every single day for eBay marketplaces. About 75 billion database calls. So there's a lot happening. You think it's just a place where you buy and sell stuff, but there's a lot of traffic on the site. Good, so real quick about myself, you probably read it already. So I've been with the company for about 9 years now. I'm based in Zurich, but the team is completely spread out over Europe, and that's my contact details. My official title is Head of Quality Engineering, but how I better describe my job is actually I'm the guy who makes sure that there's enough pizza and beer for the team. Good, so today is about knives and testing. And as we all know, there's different kinds of knives out there, and there's that old rusty one that, that is kind of dull, it only cuts. That's the only thing it does well. And then there's the little bit more elaborate one with the knife, the blade and the bottle opener. Of course, bottle openers come in handy, of course. And then, of course, on the right side, you have this great model with all the different tools and everything that you can imagine. So if you get lost in the bush, probably that thing helps you to survive. Now, there's an analogy to testing in that, because when I think back about 5 years ago at eBay, if I had to describe how we tested and how the whole mentality around testing looked like, it was somewhat like this. So are you all working in testing, or are you developers, or what? So who works in testing? Okay, good. So that's about half the room. You're all fairly young, so maybe you don't know this world anymore. But anyway, so how it used to be is that developers and testers were enemies. I'm sure that's still the case today, but really, they couldn't stand each other. They had contradicting goals. I mean, I remember when I joined eBay, we had goals in testing to file an X number of bugs. I think it was 15 bugs per week. So we got measured by how many bugs we found. Now the developers, of course, they have different goals. They don't want bugs to be filed. So you see where the problem arises. And so very, big wall, developers threw the code over the fence, and then it was up to QA to find the bugs. Yeah? But also from who were the people who worked in QA? There was a lot of untechnical people. If you ask them what happens if you type ebay.com into the browser and hit the return button, many people couldn't explain it to you, right? Because they came from a completely non-technical track. There was a lot of unneeded process as well. So we were busy writing test cases, test plans. Nobody ever read that stuff, but we still had to produce it because it was part of the process. So, thankfully, I say thankfully, we left most of that behind us. Yeah. If I ask people today, if I say, well, that's what testing looked like 5 years ago, that's who the testers were, because all they could do is really test. If you asked them to set up a continuous integration system, they said, what is that? Right? Or write test automation code. They're like, no, I test, I'm a black box tester. Right? So if you ask people, well, what does the perfect tester look like? Well, it's probably something like this. Yeah? So of course, these people can do absolutely everything. They are technical, super technical, ideally developer who just switched to the other side. We actually have that quite a bit lately, that we have developers joining the QE. We call it quality engineering team. Great exploratory testers, of course. I mean, exploratory testing, manual testing is super, super important, but it's a different skill, so you also want that. People who love to document. Don't we all love to document our work? I know Francois in the back, he loves to document. And of course, they should be a great team fit, they should have a great sense of humor and all of that, right? So, bad news is that these people don't exist, or very rarely exist. So of course, let's say as a manager, what you're supposed to do is you build a team from people that have various skills, right? Because otherwise, you're lucky if you find somebody like that in the middle, but in the end, as a manager, you need to build a team that looks like that. Now the question is, why is it so important? What has changed in the last few years? Why isn't this here really not enough, and why do we need something like that? And another question, who works in an agile context? Okay. And who doesn't? No worries, it's okay. No, really, it's totally okay not to work in an agile context. I think agile is actually one of the very overhyped things. We've seen that it doesn't always work, and there are certainly setups where non-agile is absolutely the right thing. So no problem if you're not an agile tester. But what we've seen is that this requirement to change actually really came with agility. Yeah, so where developers and testers were supposed to work much closer together. Right? You have one team, they all sit in one room or around one table, and so the developers actually expect the testers to talk code. Right? It's not enough anymore just to say this doesn't work. You earn a lot more respect if you go to the developer and say this doesn't work because this line of code causes a null pointer exception, right? That's how you get the respect from the developers. Now that's just one reason why we need a different skill set. Also, apart from the technical side, my team, for example, is pulled into what I call quality consultancy. So to teach the developers how to write good testable code. And one great example for that is to put IDs on your elements, right? We all know that when we try to automate and there's no ID on your element on your page, it can be a real pain in the neck when that ID changes. I see some people are nodding, so I take it that you've experienced that. And also we oftentimes act as just a brain for product managers, because test engineers happen just to have a really good domain knowledge of the product. So we have it actually quite often that a product manager comes to us and says, how is this supposed to work in Singapore? Do you have any idea? And then we say, well, it's actually your job, but we can still tell you how that works. So again, very many different interfaces that we work with. It's not just the developers and not just other testers. It's very different layers also of communication that is needed. Good. So now you know why it's important to have this different skill set. Now I want to talk a little bit about how to get a job at eBay. I'm not here to convince you to work for eBay, but I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of our interview process. And hiring, of course, if you want to find good people that make up a good team, the first interaction is usually hiring. Yeah? So I remember my very first job that I started. I went for an interview for an hour. I talked to a manager and human resources person, and they said, you got the job. I was really happy because I wanted that job anyway. But today, when I think back, I wouldn't take a job like that anymore. Yeah? So what I believe is after 1 hour of an interview, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. And neither does the company, who you are. So what we do at eBay, we have a very long interview process. It's sometimes way too long. So, but by the time you get a job, you probably have talked to about 15, 20 people. You probably came 2-3 times for an interview to talk to these 15, 20 people. And we ask you funny questions. So a lot of people come in, and then they come in with a stack of certifications. Java this, Microsoft that, ISTQB, all the certifications that are out there. And we usually say, okay, that's great. That shows that you have an interest in the topic, but that doesn't make you a good tester. What I do is, I don't have it. Can I just have a pen? So what I usually do is I give people a pen, and I ask them, what would you do if you are responsible for the quality of this pen? tell me, you have 5 minutes time. Describe it, what you would do. And what I find is that those 5 minutes tell me a lot more about how this person thinks as a tester compared to all the certifications, all the work experience that's on their CV. Yeah. So that's just one example of, thank you, of how we approach the whole hiring process. Of course, there's also other things like cultural fit, in terms of, it's a very diverse work environment at eBay, and you have, of course, language skills, also working in distributed teams around the globe, and all of that is important. But the point is that, it's the person that really matters. It's not the papers that you bring to the table. So anyway, we also lose some people because of this long interview process, because then they get a job offer somewhere else, so they sometimes take time, but that's just the way it is. But at the end, we usually know, we know each other very well. There's no surprises at the end, and I think that's very important, that you don't move. I mean, we have a very international workforce, and people are coming, they are relocating their families sometimes to London or Zurich or wherever. So you don't want that there's a big surprise on their first day of work. So they should know what they're getting themselves into. Good, so now you know how hiring works. Can everybody see this? So this is a few people jumping off a cliff. And it's trying new things. And we encourage people to try new things. And because the only way to get more tools to that knife that I showed is actually try new things, sometimes fail and sometimes have success. So one of the things we started a few years ago is actually to go out to conferences like this, yeah? to talk about our work. This has nothing to do really with testing. And in the beginning it was just me who did it. And then other people on the team started doing it as well. And now it's about 1/3 of the team actually goes out and regularly speaks about the type of work that they're doing. So that's great, because it builds another tool. It builds communication, presentation skills, and all that. Involvement in open source. Francois will talk about one great open source effort that we have. But we're huge users of open source tools like Selenium, but we're also trying to give back. Yeah? So not only are we using it, we're also contributing back. That builds a different skill set, again, for people. Yeah? So we don't just focus on one thing, which is testing. That's my job description. So it says testing. I should manage testing. But we actually try to spread out our wings a little bit and try new things. And from an approach perspective, we tried something called crowd testing. So we tried it. We made our experience with it. In some areas it worked, in others it didn't work, right? So I would say, bottom line, it was a failure. But it's okay, because now we know that maybe crowd testing in our context in Europe for my team maybe isn't the right thing to do. But again, it just builds new ideas, new skills. Good. So, one thing that I get often asked is, what's the return on investment of what you do outside of your testing? And I say, I don't know. I don't know what the return on investment is to spend my Easter weekend away from my family in Novosibirsk. I think it's Easter in Europe, so we're kind of, I didn't check the dates, but anyway, I'm very happy to be here. I'm just saying, like, what's the return of investment on that for the company, for me to stand here? Very hard to say. I can't measure it. But I still think it's important, because overall it builds that skill set, right? And whether there's no return on investment or whether there is a little bit, oftentimes you find that out at a much, much later stage. And with that, who knows this person? Okay. Who uses Selenium? Okay. So this is so-called Mr. WebDriver. So this is Simon Stewart. He's the guy who came up with WebDriver, which was then merged into Selenium and became Selenium. Simon, so let me tell you a little story. So it was pretty much 2 years ago, we, from our team, we open sourced Selenium Grid. Anybody uses Selenium Grid? Okay, who knew that it was done by eBay? Okay, you win the prize. So 2 years ago, we open sourced Selenium Grid, and we went to the Selenium conference in San Francisco, and Francois basically did the whole announcement. And 6 months later, I was at a conference like this in Sydney, in Australia. I did a talk, and Simon was there too. And Simon did the keynote speech, and he was talking about testing at Google. What is it like to work for Google, and you know, how does Google test? So he talked a lot about testing and automation, and then he started talking about Selenium, and then he started talking about Selenium Grid. I'm like, oh, cool, now let's listen to what he has to say. And he talked a lot about it, how great it is, and you know, how Google uses it. And then at the very end, he said something like this.
And when you do that, take a look at Selenium Grid. Selenium Grid version 2 supports the new WebDriver APIs, is pretty slick, and it was donated, it was primarily developed by an engineer at eBay called Francois Raymond.
Well, he didn't get the name 100% right, but so the point is, how cool is that? You know, 6 months after open sourcing something, Mr. WebDriver is standing in Sydney and talking about the work that you've done. That's cool. That's expanding your reach way beyond your initial job description. Open source, let me stick a little bit with open source and show you what we've done. So Selenium Grid, that's one of the real highlights that we've done, or that namely Francois has done. And currently we're working on 2 main other projects, which one's called Selendroid, and the other one is called iOS Driver. And both projects allow you to talk to either iOS or Android devices and emulators/simulators to talk Selenium to it. iOS Driver is further advanced, so that's why Francois is going to show that today to you. He just released version 0.6, so he's going to show you all the cool stuff that you can do with it. But the point is, we're still actively working on open source projects. First of all, to solve our internal problems, but then if we believe that it's good enough, we actually open source it and make it available to the other people as well. Now, why is that a good thing? Because again, it builds to that skill set that makes you a better test engineer, or a better engineer in after all. So I know Francois and all the other people on my team, they spend a lot of their free time on working on open source, but they also get the time from the company to work on it, right? So that's a very nice thing. Why, from a company perspective, why would you use open source?
It's free.
Because it's free. Yes, it's not. It costs money in a different way. Yeah? So of course you're not paying any license fees, but you have to invest into your people. Right? You have to hire good people, and there's no hotline that you have to call if something doesn't work. Yeah? You have to have people that understand the open source code, the open source project, and so it's a different kind of investment. I personally believe it's a better kind of investment than paying some license fees, but that's a personal opinion. Nevertheless, it also allows you to have much faster innovation cycles. Yeah? So I'm not relying on another company to tell me how I can automate my applications for iOS. I can take matters into my own hand, and I can actually solve the problem myself. Good, so that's why we use open source, and that's why we encourage people to contribute to open source projects. Now, just a little bit of management. So that's a dog leash. And it's something that we call the long leash management. So it's just, I just made that up because I like that word. What the long leash means is that we give people space to try things out, to grow. We don't take our time when we come into the office and when we leave the office. I don't know what it's like here in Russia, but in Europe, many companies still do that. So in the morning, you have to come in, swipe your card, and then at the end of the day, after 8.25 hours, you can go home. Right? We don't have that. We can work wherever we want, whenever we want. Of course, in a certain context, because you still have a team, but in the end, it's very, very free how you get your work done. The point is that you should get your work done. How you do that, very much up to you. And we give people room to fail. If people fail, they don't get punished. We see that as a learning opportunity, and to do it better next time, and hopefully they will. Right? That's the whole point. So there's no punishment if something goes wrong every once in a while. Good. So now you've heard a lot of different aspects of how we test, how we hire, what kind of work we do with open source software and all that. So what did that do in terms of testing and test engineering for our organization in Europe? I would say, looking back, it has brought test engineering much more into center stage. It used to be at the very end something not so super sexy. If you said, I'm a tester, okay. Today, that has completely changed. As I said, people are actually coming to us from the development organizations and want to work for us because they think that the type of work that they can do within the quality engineering organization is actually much, much more interesting than being a developer. So that's what it's really done. It has brought test engineering much more center stage and put the spotlight on it, right? So that's very nice. A result of all of this, so I already said, it has taken center stage. We're recognized worldwide. I mean, when Paul contacted me, I still don't know how you found me. But I'm like, that's cool. I mean, we do a lot of conferences, but certainly not in this part of the world. So this is cool that somebody somehow found us and invited us, right? So that's a certain recognition. And we're all people. We all want to have recognition. So this is one way to do that. Yeah. We had in my team, this is not eBay, this is in my team, I didn't have a single person leaving because they didn't like their job in the last 4 years. Usually company turnover is about 10–15%, yeah, in most tech companies. In our team, not a single person. One person moved away for very personal reasons, but that I don't count that as attrition. And we're able to put on very different hats. Yeah, very different hats. So talk to developers, we can talk to product managers, we can talk to designers, all kinds of people. And they're all happy to talk to us because they want to pick our brains, because they don't just see us like the clickers, they actually see us like human beings. And it provides great career opportunities inside eBay, but of course also outside eBay. That's the result, which is not always good for a company, but it makes people attractive. And then just my last 30 seconds. Going forward, I think the line between testing and other functions will continue to blur. So it's going to be very, very fuzzy who, you know, you can't even say I'm a tester anymore because who knows, maybe your job's going to be called something different because you work on many other different things. Testing will become a pivotal role for software development, even more so than it is today. Many companies, I believe, many more companies will use open source and contribute to open source. And I think test engineering will be really, really cool going forward. It is already, but it will be even cooler than, than right now. Good, so with that, I think we have 10 minutes for questions. So please